This podcast contains discussions around mental health and suicide. We understand that these discussions may be difficult or triggering to listen to, and if so, now may not be the best time for you to listen in. If at any stage you or a mate requires support, please call Mates in Construction on 1300 642 111. Our helpline is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Mates stronger together.
We're doing this podcast today from Turrbal Land, the Yagara Nation, and I'd like to start by acknowledging their elders, past, present and emerging. As most of you know, our First Nations people, our Aboriginal brothers and sisters, when we're talking about mental health and suicide prevention, this is causing devastation in their communities. The result of intergenerational trauma from colonisation. And what we do at Mates is we stand in solidarity with them. We want to make certain that they are respected, that they have dignity, that they have justice, but especially that we are part of that healing process. So there's a lot of work to do in Australia in this space, but together we can get there. So I just want to acknowledge the work that has been done by Aboriginal brothers and sisters. We're on Aboriginal land, always was, always will be. We're also talking this podcast, we're talking about suicide, we're talking about people who have had their own suicide struggles, those who have lost mates and family members, and we know the trauma of this is quite impactful. So many coulda, woulda, shouldas. And so I just want to acknowledge those people who may be listening to this podcast who have walked that trail and let you know that we hear you and acknowledge the pain and the trauma you've been through and may still be going through.
G'day and welcome to another podcast episode with Mates in Construction. Really grateful that you're able to all join us today, no matter where you're listening in from, and hope all is well at present. I'm joined today by Nick and James. Thanks for joining us, guys.
G'day, Damo. How you going?
Good. James.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us. Yeah, no worries, mate. You're always welcome. So today we're going to talk a little bit about what happens when things go wrong on site. So if it's a critical incident or a near miss, or if there's an injury or death on site. Nick, I might just get you to talk a little bit about the nature of some of the stuff we'll be talking about today, just in support of people who might be listening in.
So Mates has been around for a long time, and we know that when we talk about people's lived experience that we have to be pretty careful, because from time to time there might be someone who has been directly impacted by something difficult on site, as you've just mentioned, whether it's a critical incident, it's witnessing something really difficult like an accident. So that's the kind of stuff we'll be talking about today. And we just wanted to make sure that if that's something that's, going to upset you, if it's not your day, if it's something that's going to bring up stuff that you're not ready to really listen to, that now's your time to do something else and maybe turn away. And if you weren't expecting to be impacted by this conversation, but you are, that's really normal and okay as well. Yeah. And of course, we've got our 1300 phone number that people can call into and talk to a case manager at any time if they need to just get some stuff off their chest.
For sure. And just a reminder for everyone, that number is 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 1300 642 111. If you call Monday to Friday in normal business hours, you will speak directly with a Mates employee. Otherwise, someone will be on that phone line 24/7, so don't hesitate to reach out. And if you see a mate that's struggling, whether it's friend, family member, colleague, whatever it may be, reach out to them, say good day, see how they're going. So Nick, earlier this year for Queensland, the psychosocial hazards document came out. Might just get you to talk a little bit about what that means. So we have obviously put content out before around that document, but just as a reminder for everyone, might get you to chat a little bit about what's in there.
So the Code of Practice, that was an amendment to the Workplace Health and Safety Act, really spelled out for organisations, companies, employers, what they need to do from a psychosocial hazard perspective to look after their workforce. And what that really means in practice, because that sounds like a whole lot of fancy words, is that in construction in particular, we have a really good safety structure of what to do to prevent, accidents, what to do to prevent safety concerns. But the code really says that can't just be physical hazards. It has to take into account people's mental health as well, and understanding what some of those common stresses or common pressures or common impacts on people's mental health actually is. And it is the responsibility of that workplace to provide a safe environment attached to what some of those hazards are. In construction, we know at the moment there's a huge push on at the moment across the board in all sorts of different sectors, largely because of the impact COVID's had, and projects really pushing hard to get the job done. And we know from a psychosocial perspective that often means a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, and it can mean a lot of conflict with your direct supervisor as well. Mates did a little bit of research in 2020 to 2021 around some of these stresses, and the number one thing that kept coming back as we were working with sites was actually supervisor conflict and supervisor task conflict. And in the context of stress, you can understand why those two things could be really difficult to manage if you're trying to just go to work and make ends meet. So when we talk about the psychosocial code of practice, that's what we're really looking at. What are those hazards from a mental health perspective, and how does a company proper mitigate and protect the workforce against some of those hazards?
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah. Look, it's been an interesting, last few years around the pressures that exist in the industry. Many of them internal, a lot of them out of people's control. Might just get you to expand a little bit on what those pressures look like and what some of the stuff that people are dealing with.
Yeah, so construction full stop is a high-risk industry. We know that from the safety profile and what people go through in terms of workplace health and safety. But when there are pressures on work groups to get the job done, it can often mean that you're also experiencing accidents. You're experiencing near misses. You're experiencing things on site that you can really try to plan for and plan for your safety profile to protect people. But unfortunately do happen. It's a part of the industry. Accidents happen. Yep. And we at Mates have seen probably more than we normally would over a reporting period, particularly in the last 6 months.
Right.
And from time to time, because it is a high-risk industry and because accidents are a part of the industry, people can turn a blind eye to what are some of the psychosocial hazards attached to experiencing an accident.
Right.
We can focus really closely on how to mitigate that and prevent that from happening in the future, but we don't necessarily focus on the impacts of the workforce's mental health.
Right.
And what we know from research that we've done and the development of a new program called Mates Respond is that there actually is a lot of evidence around how difficult that can be for both individuals in a workplace, but also the broader work group, and seeing mates go through a really difficult time.
Yep.
All of the evidence shows that you can feel really out of control
of
a situation, and that's a huge stressor. That's a hazard. When you feel out of control and that you can't provide the safety required for a work group, that it can be really, really difficult on your mental health.
Yep.
Similarly, if you've had your own experiences in the past of an accident, of a near miss, of some physical detriments to your own health, that can all come up again.
Yep.
It can all be brought to the surface, and that's really normal. It's actually a normal human response when you see someone go through a difficult time, that it brings up in your own personal life when you've gone through a difficult time.
Yep.
And I think from time to time as well, people can be a bit avoidant of addressing that and accepting that that is happening for them.
Yep.
And part of the program that we've developed, Mates Respond, really unpacks that it's actually good to just sit in that space, to go, hang on a second, this has happened to me as well.
Yep.
I am having a hard time because of it, and that's okay.
Yep.
And Jimmy, you've sort of worked for Mates for almost 6 years now, I think it is, and you probably would have experienced probably over 200 to 300 critical incidents where you've gone out and you've supported a site afterwards. What's your experience of how people get through some of those more difficult difficult emotions attached to, critical incidents and accidents?
So it's like a lot of the ones we've gone to, it's always been like kind of getting out there, making sure all the workers are kind of keeping an eye on each other, and it kind of follows the whole mates ethos, which is mates helping mates. And the whole idea of it is just like when we go out there after these events, we're there just to help people kind of realise and understand that like they're in this together, and it's okay to have those emotions, it's okay to have those feelings. And that's probably one of the biggest things that we've always done with mates is kind of like we normalise within that suicidality, but we normalise the fact that when these incidents happen, people's mental health will drop. They might get more emotional, they might cry, they might get angry. But it's in normalising that, what it does is it makes workers feel comfortable and confident in actually reaching out to their friends and talking about it. Because culture in Australia has always been like men don't really talk about their feelings. We hide it all in. We have a glass of concrete. But what we're trying to do is change that, because if you have a glass of concrete and ignore your feelings, nothing's going to get better. Yeah. While if after an event, workers are sitting there, they're overwhelmed, they're really they just can't get past it, then it's important to talk about those feelings, talk about how they're sad. And even if they're just like Nick said before, like about how sometimes past events can come flooding back, and it's even about working through those and going, well, you're allowed to be sad about a past event because that past event still will be affecting you.
And for some people, you can, as Nick mentioned earlier, you can be completely unaware of how that's going to come up. I've heard you guys talk about, even if a critical incident happens on another site, then it can really affect other people on other sites, because it's a reminder of something that they may have experienced in the past. So
yeah, definitely. And like that's something we find a lot of, like where you could go to one site where there's been something that's happened, and then I get a phone call from another site or another company saying, oh, look, we've had some workers that have been affected by this. And construction industry is very, what's the word? Not friendly, very kind of crossover. So a lot of workers will each other quite like work with each other in different jobs. So workers that you might not even realise were close with some of the workers that might have been affected are. Yeah. And so it's really important. And one thing we do with the critical incidents and postventions, and we do this, is actually making sure everyone's involved. Yeah. So similar to other programs, but we actually go, no, everyone needs to be involved in this. It's not about doing half a site or just the management or just a couple of people. Yeah. It's actually everyone needs to be involved, because even though the management or someone might say, oh, well, he wasn't here that day, so he's not affected by it, that doesn't matter, because he might have been affected by something else, and it's really getting to him. And what we've found is a lot of the people that do first aid, yes, they can be affected by the adrenaline and like the kind of the trauma response, but they can sometimes deal with it better because they've actually done something with the event. Gotcha. While people that have just heard about it or been near it can sometimes be more affected because they've felt like they haven't been able to do anything. And then when you can't feel like you can do something, you can feel overwhelmed that you've missed something, failed something. So for a lot of workers, because they want to, construction workers want to do things, fix things. Yeah. So if they can't fix something, sometimes it can kind of sit on them and weigh on them, and they can feel a bit overwhelmed by that as well. Yep,
makes sense.
We found too that everybody processes an event really differently. So some people's initial reaction will be to run through the gamut of emotions of sadness, of fear, of anger. Yep. But for others, it can take a bit of time to actually process what's just happened. Yep. And you might find that, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 6 weeks later, after you've had that time to really think about what's happened, think about some of the consequences of those accidents, that you can really start to struggle. And because the event's already passed, not even understand why you're struggling or where that anger comes from or where that sadness comes from. And that's why I guess following up after these things is really important as well. We work with a lot of companies who do a fantastic job at containing the initial safety, running through best practice in terms of normalising the emotions that Jimmy was talking about, and providing those links to support. But if that's not followed up with regular check-ins, regular understanding that this stuff can impact you at a later date, it can almost miss the mark in terms of having a really good response.
So even though the response can be a longer time frame, the response to the initial response to the incident is really time critical. Even though the way people deal with it may not be immediate, stuff can come up for them, as you said, 6 weeks later or maybe months later.
Yeah. And part of that Mates Respond program that we've been developing over the last 12 months was looking at a bit of research we did just before COVID on what makes a good critical incident experience, if there can be one,
Yep.
from a mental health perspective. So actually asking connectors, people in the industry who've supported sites after these kind of things, what works.
Yep.
And the number one thing that kept coming up in themes was being prepared.
Yep.
So actually understanding what that initial response is going to be,
Yep.
and then when you do come and check back in. So having a plan in place for that initial containment of safety,
Yep.
but then a plan in place for the next 3 to 6 months of coming back, talking to the work group, explaining that it's still normal,
Yep.
it's still perfectly acceptable to need support because
Yep.
of what you've experienced
Yep.
after the event as well.
Yep.
That follow-up's really critical.
Yep.
And yeah, with the mates program, what we do is we do follow up. So we'll always, when there is an incident or a near miss or an accident on site, we always go back like a week or two later,
Yep.
just to touch base again with site, see how everyone's going, and then just reiterate the ongoing support.
Yep.
And then with the mates respond program, what we've created is almost a framework in itself.
Yep.
So we provide the workers that do the respond program with a framework
Yep.
to take back to their companies, to take back to their sites, so that when the event does happen, they've got a step-by-step process. Because when crisis or a critical incident happens, it can be hard. Like, you're so focused on the crisis, you kind of can be overwhelmed. So it's a lot easier to have a framework or a step-by-step process to go, sweet, I've done this.
Yep.
All right, this process is in place. And like Nick was saying, that long term, like 6 months later, it's hard with mates because we can stay in contact, but obviously we get busy and we're elsewhere.
Yep.
So it's important for those sites to kind of just have that ongoing, all right, this instance happened with our team. We're a family, we're a team, let's stay together, let's continue to check in with each other moving forward.
Yep.
And it's important to kind of, like, when we do these events, we always talk about, all right, their connectors, their assists in the room,
Yep.
getting them to be aware of, all right, these workers that saw this
Yep.
or didn't see this are going to be probably more elevated or escalated over the next couple of weeks.
Yeah, I'd imagine the process, you said really well just before, Nick, around what does a good, response look like if there can be one from a mental health perspective. I guess there's a high potential where it could really bring a team together.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and that perhaps can change that or contribute to the change in that culture of talking about mental health, responding to an incident.
Absolutely. And what we found, not just from that research, but broader research into mental health, is that you're spending 95% of your time at work. Having peers and people that you can confide in, talk to about your problems, and just get stuff off your chest.
Yep.
Whether it is, yeah, mate, I'm still impacted by that. I'm still having thoughts about that.
Yep.
Can't sleep at night.
Yep.
And your mate saying, oh, I reckon you need to go and see a professional, because if you're not getting sleep, that's the first thing that can often lead to a real decline, quick decline
Yep.
in your mental health.
Yep.
Having the ability to have those conversations
Yep.
and work through it together
Yep.
just really makes people who are often isolated feel connected,
Yep.
a part of a community,
Yep.
part of a sense of we're doing this together. I'm not on my own.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are people that have got my back.
Yeah.
I think it's worth acknowledging as well, particularly in that research we did with connectors and safety professionals and people in the industry, that there are lots of times that the construction industry has pioneered this type of work, done it incredibly well, set up really good systems so that teams, after they've experienced something like this, are supported, do get through it together, do take the time to do the work, to check in on each other
Yeah.
and check in on the broader site, not just individuals, but everybody's
Yeah.
well-being. And it's been that feedback, that experience that has really shaped Mates Respond.
Yeah.
We know that often in times of crisis, we can kind of lean on experts or professionals or people that aren't necessarily connected to our industry and our community.
Yep.
Whereas the real strength, what we've noticed in the development of this program, is the industry themselves,
Yeah.
who've come up with their own solutions, who've developed their own ways of working with people who have experienced a really traumatic, difficult event.
Yeah.
And by pivoting off their experience and by demonstrating what good practice is and being prepared and understanding what some of those common responses are, just really sets people up for success
Yeah. Brilliant.
in a really difficult time.
So something really interesting that you mentioned just before, Nick, was 95% of our time is spent in the workplace and with our work colleagues, workmates. And while the Mates Respond program really looks at how connectors and assist trained volunteers and I guess supervisors and leadership of a site company, site and company, can be a part of that response. So something that I think would be really good to talk about is what can individuals do to support their mates. So, that side-by-side work every single day. What can that look like if you know your mate's been impacted by a recent incident or they might not be travelling too well?
There's a number of things. Just checking, actually saying, what we went through last week was pretty full on. How do you feel about it?
Yeah.
Are you all right, mate? Are you getting sleep? Are you doing your normal routine?
Yeah.
How's your family going? Have you told them about it?
Yeah.
Making sure they've got that support network in place.
Yeah.
Because more than likely, you're going to talk to your mates about that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, I went home and I kicked off with my missus because I was feeling like really bad after what happened.
Yeah.
They're going to have that conversation.
Yeah.
And then afterwards, it's listening to those key, what we like to call hooks of, oh, okay, so you're not sleeping.
Yeah.
Have you spoken to someone about that?
Yeah.
Do you need to take a bit of time off leave?
Yeah.
I can come with you to ask your direct supervisor.
Yeah.
And have you had thoughts of suicide? You'd be surprised when people go through a really difficult time. They might necessarily have a plan to die by suicide, but the thought crosses their mind.
Yeah.
And therefore having connectors and people on site who can actually have that conversation in a meaningful way, develop that trust with their peers so that if the answer is yes, you can link them into the supports that they need.
Yeah.
That really makes a huge difference.
Yeah. Yeah.
Definitely. And look, like Nick was saying, it's just having those conversations. So people are already having those conversations on site about their partners or their days or how they're going, but it's going a bit deeper and just being aware that not just taking everything's fine or as an answer. If you're worried about them or if you feel like there's invitations there or there's warning signs, it's actually kind of having that conversation, not letting people just kind of brush it off or go, nah, I'm all good, I'll be fine tomorrow.
Yeah.
But actually kind of calling your mate out and going, well, mate, we went home yesterday, you went to the pub and I left, but you stayed there all night. That's not normal for you. So these aren't normal things. And it's mates being mates. And that's like I said before, that is the whole ethos of mates. It's mates looking out for mates. So we'll lend a mate a truck, we'll help them move house, we'll give them anything to close off our back if need be. But with mental health, it's just going that bit deeper. And it can be harder because it's something we haven't been taught, but just kind of feeling comfortable to actually have that conversation and go, like Nick said, that event's really affected everyone on site. Are you going okay?
Yeah.
Can I help you if anything? Can I call mates? Can we go on the employee assist program or something like that?
Yeah. Yeah. Brilliant. So, I mean, that's I guess a perfect lead in to, if you see a mate that's struggling, connecting them or linking them up with a connect or assist volunteer on site, which would then potentially, if there's contact with mates, look at some level of case management. So what does that look like if people go down that path?
I think often people can get confused between case management and, say, an EAP service provider, so an employee assistance program.
Yep.
So an employee assistance program, they'll often deal with a more clinical way of looking at how you think. So actually unpacking some of your thoughts, some of your feelings, and how that sits with you. So for a lot of people, that's uncomfortable, and it's not their first port of call.
Yep.
Whereas case management is much more about walking alongside you.
Gotcha. Yep.
So asking some of those key questions around your mental health, like, are you sleeping? How are your relationships?
Yeah.
And then if the person is saying, not great on both fronts, going, right, I'm going to find you the appropriate supports and some help to start working on those issues. The thing about case management too is we'll check back in with you.
Yeah.
So if we've had that conversation, the incident's happened, you're not sleeping, you're fighting with your partner, and then we link you into, say, a counsellor and, a relationship counsellor, and you come back to us and say, oh, that was a really terrible experience, never going back there. We won't just leave you high and dry.
Sure.
We'll go, okay, that didn't work. Let's find something that's more appropriate. And so it's kind of that walking alongside you. It's not counselling. But it's that constant check-in and that constant level of support for as long as you need it, really.
Yeah, exactly. It's that constant check-in, that follow-up, and for a lot of workers, they might not have those supports at home. They might not have those supports in their mates. So having that external support that just gives them a call each week and says, hey, mate, how's things traveling? Have you done this? And sometimes it can be helpful to kind of push you into getting help. Other times it can be helpful just to have that person call and say, mate, how's today? Because today might be a worse day than last week. So it's just having that follow-up and just checking in with them. The way I've always put the case management program is just having professional mates, if that makes sense. We're not sitting there trying to say that we're the the council or the site, because we're a mate who's got some more professional framework around us to kind of give you the right advice.
Yeah.
Sometimes it can be about unpacking some common myths as well.
Yeah.
Like I was mentioning, sometimes people are a bit reluctant to go to EAP.
I'd imagine the process would be a pretty big information dump for people.
100%.
Yeah.
And often the only time people have heard of an EAP provider is when there might be a HR issue.
Yeah.
And someone says, I think you need to talk to EAP.
Yeah.
It can be so much more than that.
Yeah.
It can be sessions about what happened to you as a kid. It can be sessions about how you're interacting with your partner and understanding some of those motivation factors. It can be about how to have a difficult conversation with a colleague that you haven't had the guts to before.
Yeah.
EAP, so employee assistance programs, can really help just get through some of those mental blocks that you might have around some of those things. And for our case management team, it can often be about debunking some of the myths as well.
Yeah.
Like your direct supervisor is not going to find out what you spoke about in your EAP session.
Yeah.
It's 100% free.
Yeah.
It's confidential.
Yeah.
That time is really about you and working on yourself and some of those drivers that might be existing in your own mind that nobody else has any kind of information about.
Yeah.
So it's a huge beneficial kind of opportunity for people.
There, yeah.
But there can be a lot of worry and concern about what might actually happen when you go and you have a session with a counsellor.
Yeah.
So something else we're finding at the moment, but largely because of COVID, is a lot of people are focusing on their mental health and reaching out to psychologists and the broader mental health sector much more than they have in the past. And obviously there's a cost attached to that. And there can often be wait lists as well in terms of, even just getting into a GP and getting your mental health care plan if you choose to go down that path. So EAPs are a real circuit breaker for a lot of people because the company's paying for it, so you're not out of pocket.
Yeah.
You're still getting that clinical mental health support that you need, but you're not in that broader system of waiting, trying to get help.
Yeah.
So I think it's a huge underutilised resource that we could all in the industry do a lot better at promoting and supporting people when they need that help.
For sure. That's great information, Nick. Thank you. You've both talked a little bit about that aftercare follow-up. And James, one of the things that you said before that I thought was a really good descriptor. It certainly helped me to understand better around what case management is that you're a professional mate. So you're a mate, you're keeping in touch with these people, obviously, because you care. But there's a little bit of structure there around what that looks like. So whether it's a weekly follow-up or if somebody's sort of traveling a bit better, then it might be fortnightly or monthly, or it might be more often. So is there anything that you wanted to add to what that aftercare follow-up, just to help people understand, once they get into perhaps a better place, are they the drivers of what that looks like, or do you suggest what might be good for them moving forward?
It's like a bit of both. So what we normally do is, like, if it's to do with like a site or a critical incident, we'll kind of let the site guide us. So we'll go back once or twice, and then we let the site kind of get us back there if need be, or call us.
Yeah.
When it's case management, what we normally do is our case management process is anywhere from like 2 to 6 weeks as like a normal kind of case length per se.
Yep.
That can be longer, that can be shorter, depending on the individual.
Yep.
But normally after a month, we rely on the individual to kind of be, if they're connected into help, if they're moving forward, if they're in a good spot, we let them kind of be the guide. Yep. So we might say to them, look, we're not going to call you anymore, but you've got my mobile, you've got a helpline, you make contact with us. Just because we have a lot of people coming through, so we can't always kind of be calling everyone all the time.
For sure.
So we let what we want to do is make sure, sweet, this individual's in a good headspace, they've been connected into help, they're they're moving forward and they're going to continue with that. And then the way Mates works is we never close anyone, if that makes sense. So no one's ever we don't ever go, all right, no, we're never going to talk to you again. What we do is we just swap from being where the kind of the instigators, we're calling them, to you call us when you need us, because this is our number, this is who we are. We're always around, we're on sites, we've got connectors, assists, we've got Mate staff. So it's like, we'll let you lead your own recovery now, instead of Mates kind of telling you how to lead your recovery. Yeah. So we're very kind of like self-determination and like kind of person.
And empowerment.
Empowered. We empower the workers. And sometimes that works well. Sometimes workers want us to keep calling them.
Yep.
And like we will. We're never just like, nah, like screw you, we're not going to call you.
Yep.
We'll give them a call and check in and just say, look, mate, like instead of doing, like you said, it might be, instead of where I'm calling them weekly, I drop to monthly because I'm like, all right, mate, you're in a good spot.
Yep.
You're going better.
Yep.
Like I'm going to call you each month and just check in. But
Yep.
if you need anything in that month period, you know how to grab me or get the helpline.
Perfect. Yep.
We're pretty lucky at Mates too that our case managers kind of straddle two worlds. So not only are they qualified as social workers or psychologists, but for the vast bulk of them, they've had experience in the industry.
Yeah.
They've actually been on the tools.
Yeah.
They know how to talk to people.
It's such a critical thing to understand from a personal perspective, the challenges that the people in the industry face. It would be exactly the same as any industry, unless you're in that industry, you just don't understand. So you both spoke throughout this episode around Mates Respond. We might just finish up with talking a little bit more about Mates Respond and where that came from. What was the purpose of Respond, and I guess getting back to that ethos of Mates, of making Mates redundant, and the industry self-sufficient in or having that increased self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. I think where it came from is we've identified for a really long time that the industry themselves have solutions to some of the challenges that we face because of the high risk nature of the industry and also because of the high rates of suicide. So that's how Mates was started.
Yep.
We at Mates, since the beginning, whenever there's an accident, whenever there's a critical incident, whenever there's a suicide on site, we go out and we either perform what we call a postvention,
Yep.
which is what Jimmy was talking about before, which is normalising some of the really difficult emotions that people can experience because of that,
Yep.
and linking people into support. Or if it's a critical incident, very similar process, but obviously someone hasn't necessarily passed on,
Yep.
and it's not suicide. So slightly different,
Yep.
but similar at the same time.
Yep.
Part of our ethos at Mates, as you mentioned, is making ourselves redundant,
Yep.
is making sure that people are skilled and trained and able to do every part of the Mates broader program. That's why we have connectors. That's why we have assist volunteers. So Mates Respond really came from that, saying, okay, we're performing this service for the industry. What about people who are confident, capable, and Mates advocates? What about them? Can they do postventions and critical incidents?
Yep.
So we commissioned a bit of research back in 2019 with one of the world's most eminent scholars in this space. She's worked with first responders like ambulance workers. She's worked with police, people that are consistently going and experiencing really difficult,
Yep.
high-end traumatic events.
Yep.
And so she looked at all the body of research as to what a good experience looks like from a mental health lens. But she also interviewed, I think it was around between 20 and 30 of our own connectors
Yep.
who themselves have gone through this process to see what they needed out of a training package, what
Yep.
they needed to feel confident and capable.
Yep.
And so through all of that research over the last 12 months, we've developed a new suite of training around what you actually do when something like this happens.
Yep.
What are some of the common experiences? How do you actually address a work group? How do you get up in front of people and talk about what's been a really difficult, stressful time?
Yep.
And so far what we found is that the feedback has been really positive.
Yeah, and it's been very positive, around people they're getting benefits from it. So we've always had workers that, like Nick said, we've always had people call us up and say, "Can you come out?" But what we want to do, the whole point of Mates is to make ourselves redundant. So it's about going, all right, well, we want to make sure that if we're not here tomorrow, if we get defunded, then these workers still have the ability and the skills to do it themselves without us there.
Yep.
And it is just about what we provide in Respond is a framework. So we give them the skills to kind of talk to a work group. We also provide them with information around language around suicide. We provide them with vicarious trauma information. We provide them with a framework or a policy about critical incidents to take to their employers or their companies. So that way, when something does happen, they've got everything in a row. They've got that collateral. They've got that information. So it's not like, all right, you stand up there, you do what I do every week. It's like, no, actually, here's the breakdown of it, like being a connector and assist. We don't just say, all right, all good, you're an assist person, you figure it out. We give them a framework.
Yep.
And that's really important because what it does is it means that workers then have something to fall back on. Because when we feel uncomfortable and we feel out of place, if we don't have something to fall back on or if anything like that, we can kind of not crash out, but we can get nervous.
Yep.
But if you have something to fall back on or a framework, that nervousness you still might be nervous, but you're going to be less nervous. You're going to have that ability to go, all right, I'm just going to follow this dot by dot by dot, and we provide a run sheet. So we actually give people a sheet of paper that they can read in front of a group.
Brilliant.
So instead of where you actually get up there and go, like, screw, how do I read this or how do I do this? It's like, 1, 2, 3, and just read it out. And it's really important because that, like, some workers feel confident talking in front of a work group.
Yeah.
Some workers have never had to do it before.
Yeah.
It's like our mate staff, like some of our mate staff, like they can talk all the time, but it can be hard sometimes to do other stuff. But and it's one of those things where it's about actually going, all right, how do we kind of provide workers with the best thing around this?
Yeah.
I think too, it's about recognising that those skills already exist.
Yeah.
Like some of the best post-vention and critical incident responses I've been to is where someone from the site has had the confidence and the skills and the understanding of how to contain that initial safety and support really well.
Yeah.
Like we learn from the industry.
Yeah. Yeah.
And a large part of this pilot that we've been experiencing for the last 12 months, it's almost finished, is just hearing some of that feedback of, this is a great framework. It kind of ties into what we already do. And now I feel even more confident that when something like this happens, I am doing the right thing.
Yeah.
I am following back best practice.
Yeah.
I am making sure that my peers and my colleagues and my mates on site are okay.
Yeah.
So that's probably been one of the biggest learnings Jimmy and I've
Oh, definitely. Like, and there's like, I still get amazed, like when I go to site and I'll have like the site like project manager or the delegate or like an organizer, and they'll get up and speak before me. And some of the times it's just in HSRs, and some of the times it's just, I don't need to say anything. I'm like, all right, everything's been said. And it's like, it's great because it's like and the way they say it, the way they explain it is very industry and very kind of work group focused. So it's like I'm a blow-in while these guys are there, they're on the sites, they're on the ground, and women as well. And then they have that kind of ability to just go like, come and roll it out. And then all we really do is just out on the fact that, look, we're here, we can be around for a bit and provide that support.
I guess what we've talked about so far is how mates respond is of benefit from a community development perspective, which is obviously a really important thing. But I guess there's a large benefit too for sites that might be in regional and remote areas where, mates would still go to that site after a critical incident. But it may be 3 or 4 days before
we can actually physically
get there.
It's a really remote location.
It's almost like a tiding over or being something for
it's that initial containment. So that first 24 hours can be really critical for workers and their mental health to understand that there is a process in place for dealing with this, that there are avenues for support, and just getting that up and running until we can get there physically, the mates team, is a huge step in the right direction for that site and their general well-being moving forward.
It's having that buffer, like so, and that's the thing. It's having that buffer until we can get there, or if some sites don't need us, but it's that buffer. So like if they are out at Normanton or something, it's actually going, all right, you've got people here who can do this conversation, have that, and feel confident doing that conversation. Yeah. So instead of where they're sitting there like waiting for mates to get there, it's like, no, you guys can do this. You can start this process.
You're good.
We're just going to come in afterwards and just reiterate what you've said and just be there again and kind of follow up.
Particularly from a case management perspective, because there's obviously that initial containment and doing the right thing, but if someone's really struggling and they need that broader clinical support and services, that's where case managers can really provide that additional level of support.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, everything about Mates Respond sounds like a really positive option for sites to help facilitate. James, do you want to talk a little bit about the logistics? How long is the training and how to be involved in it?
Yeah, so there's a couple of parts to it. The training, look, at present we're sitting at around 4 hours for the training. Sometimes it can go a bit longer if there's more conversations. Sometimes it can go a little bit less if there's less conversations. Yeah. The way we're rolling it at the moment is basically we're having a minimum of 8. We can have a maximum of 25, 30, but the minimum's kind of just to make sure that like it doesn't just turn into kind of a counselling circle per se.
For sure.
But it's just about providing that. What we're doing at present is we are running mixed ones in the office pretty regularly in Spring Hill and Brisbane. Yep. But we're also running, we can do them on sites, we can do them in the regional areas. We've been up to Cairns and Townsville and done some. We might be going up to Rocky soon to do one, and we've We even go to Darwin and up in the Territory to do them as well. So we are getting out and about to do them, and it's just so it's not about going, oh, we might be regional or remote. Like, still give us a call, still make contact, because we can definitely try and organise to get out there and do that.
So to organise it, just for everybody listening, if they want to organise one on their site, to either give us a call or go through the website, or chat with their field officer as well in their region.
There are a couple of prerequisites. So we do ask that you've already done the connector training,
of course,
just so that when you are in a position that you're a respond volunteer, if something comes up, you know what to do in those difficult scenarios. So it's you have to be a connector or an assist volunteer. But other than that, it's a really straightforward process of talking to your local field officer and just scheduling it in.
And look, if anybody is keen to, if they've done their general awareness training, or if you would like general awareness training on your site, absolutely touch base with mates, or have a chat with your field officer and find out how we can get you on to the next training for Connector or Assist. We would love to have you there. Thanks again, Nick and James, for sharing so much information and learnings around the development of Mates Respond and how it supports sites. Always appreciate your time, and it's once again great to chat with you both.
Yeah, thanks, Damo. I guess in wrapping up as well, it's important to acknowledge that whenever critical incidents or difficult things happen on site, that there is going to be an impact. And Mates is very much available to anybody, whether you've done the respond training, whether you've even done GAC training, it doesn't matter. If you need us to come and provide some support, or if you've got a mate who's struggling because they've heard about or experienced a critical incident, just give us a call. We can put a case plan in place and make sure that you get back on your feet.
24/7, everyone. 1300 642 111. If you or a mate are struggling, don't hesitate to reach out and give us a call. Thanks very much.